So how long did you run the action in the cage outside of the?
I started for a week and it was extended to 10 days, but it was over a year and a half. I was in the streets every day, not every single day, but, vigiling. So you start on the street, you go out there with a sign, stop the shackling, and people drive by and they get off work the same time and you're in front of the jail. And then you wave and you're out there, and I'm out there like a fool waving at everybody, but what else you gonna do? Hello, and they're shackling and stop the shack. And after several months of this, people are waving back, and then the press stories start leaking out little by little, and people are honking horns and waving back. I mean, it's this process, little by little by little.
The consistency is important.
The consistency,
It's
and
not.
just being
It's
out
not
there.
the length of time per unit time when you're out there. It's just you got to be out there on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And you gotta come back. This is not the only time she's lived in a jail cell
Yeah.
outside of Syracuse.
Yeah.
You got sick, didn't you, a little bit from the weather? Wasn't there a few times you got sick just from the wear and tear of being out in the weather? Not too bad?
Oh, my urban camping, I call it. Whether at the federal building or.
So you enjoyed
it's
the fresh air?
powerful. Huh?
You enjoyed the fresh
I mean, when well, it's another story, but I was out there when it was 16 below once too, and I had no idea it was going to go below 16 below, but when the Jesuits were murdered and the church women in El Salvador, but that was a whole nother. But just putting yourself out there, and last time I was arrested, but I always called it committing art, I'm not breaking the law, I'm committing art, or they'll say destruction of government property. No, I'm enhancing government property by telling the truth about it, but being out there, and for me it's art, just getting out there and, with the pictures, with graphics, with things, and whether, on the prison walls, we organized a demonstration, and Bear was in charge, and it was serious. It was a death in the jail, but
Very serious.
and I had spray painted at the beginning of the war, shame, shame, shame in '93, and so I couldn't do that, with this very important demonstration, but I brought chalk. And so we were writing on the prison walls, and the
Well,
kids.
no, we were supposed to write on the pavement and you started writing on the
The kids started showing. The kids of the man murdered in the jail,
Yeah.
they started writing on the wall, and it's so beautiful to be out there with people in the streets.
One of the things that scare, you get calls at any Catholic worker house to speak at a church or a college or whatever. And I would say 15 years ago, if I inevitably talk about jail and prison when I'm asked to speak, because the people that come to, like someone else mentioned, right? That's what happens to people. They go to jail, then you don't see them for 2 years, and then they're back, and 2 years later they get back. So, but I would say 15 years ago, most people expressed ignorance, like on basic stuff, right? Like we incarcerate more people, blah, blah, blah. And now what scares me is that's not ignorance anymore. It's sort of indifference. And I'm shocked that I can speak to a college class, for instance, and say that, and instead of having people say, oh my God, I never knew that, they just go, oh yeah. And I'm
It's
like,
acceptance.
really? And so some of what we've been doing in New York is just trying to get some people out. I mean, I would love to abolish prisons, and we tried, but right. And like, many of you know Matt DeLuisio from different things, right? And Matt now is working really actively with the Brooklyn Bail Fund, which is a great way to get the people the hell out in a hurry. Because a huge percentage of the people at Rikers are simply there because they couldn't pay bail.
Low cash bails.
Well,
And then they plea out so that they can not lose their apartment or their family can eat or whatever, right? The other place that lately we've been trying to do some work is around parole. It's amazing how many people go back. And the reason, many of you may know this, so shut me up if you do, but most people go back to jail and then prison. Like you go to Rikers first, and then you get farmed out somewhere where you're
You get sentenced.
up here and you're 6
Right.
hours from your family, even though you can show that recidivism is prevented if you can see your family. But the weird thing is, like parole initially was supposed to help people transition, blah, 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 like in the late 1800s. And it's weird because of the large majority of people that get sent back, they didn't commit another crime. Like that's supposed to be the idea, that they don't commit another crime, right? And they get violated. And with homeless men, primarily in New York City, either Dominican, Puerto Rican, or black, I mean it's always. One guy, he was with his caseworker, got to his shelter late. If you get to your shelter late, you lose your bed. This is simple, right? But then he broke 2 terms of his parole because he had a change of address and he broke curfew. So he goes back to jail for breaking curfew. You should be grounded by mom. I'm serious, like think for a minute. That's insane. And then from Rikers, you immediately get sent back upstate. And now you're in and you do something wrong, I don't know, sneezing, smiling with intent to laugh. And you get placed for another 6 months or a year, which gives you time. And when I started talking to people that are on parole, there are a couple of parole officers are actually, former parole officers are working very actively with us, which is great. And then we go, I'm trying to do this through the channels, which is, like, I need to get back in the street, this shit's driving me nuts. But, like, we've met with all the DAs in New York except Queens. I don't know why she won't meet with us, but everybody else has. And we have meeting after meeting, and, so I don't know, but I guess just the indifference of people and then the inability to break through at some level can be frustrating. Like I said, it feels like it's time to get back in the street.
To me, the sound of what you're saying is that the agency holds together and no one is responsible, but no one ever pays a penalty. No one who is an actor creating the penalties for these minor things ever gets penalized.
No, and the weird thing is, right, I mean, people talk about private prisons, and with good reason. I'm not discounting that. But there are fewer private prisons in the United States now than there were 10 years ago. The government has figured out that that's a great moneymaker. You don't need a private prison if the system itself can become self-perpetuating, which it is. And that...
Let me tell you
No, I'm sorry.
something.
We're supposed to announce the good news, and I just didn't do any of that.
At the conference, focusing on the young black youth too, there were young men in their late 30s who'd done 15, 20, well, I can't quite put it together, but they'd done a significant amount of time, who were recently released from prison and telling their story. But you could see the haunting in their eyes. I mean, they were truly broken men. And what's happening to people in the system, what they're releasing, it's like almost like, I don't know if I'm wrong to say this, but toxic waste. There's a sense that they become the toxic waste of this awful, but they're human beings, but they are so destroyed on so many levels. And there's so little, here in society. I mean, when you look in their eyes and you look in their faces and just, you're speechless and you just want to hold them in your arms and you want to tell them it's going to be all right, but you can't do that. You can't. You want to say you're sorry. You can't do that. You can only fight, but man, it's crushing.
I want to make 2 comments afterwards.
Are you aware of what's happening in Greene County in the jail?
Greene County,
Greene County, New York?
no.
Okay, it's very similar. After the jail on Rikers Island, Greene County was judged the worst jail in the state
Okay.
on many, many levels. One of the minor levels was that building was falling apart.
Can you speak as loud as you
And
can?
now
A little louder, just a little louder. You can stand up.
Oh, well.
No, you don't have to. Okay.
Okay. Greene County, New York, okay. The jail was judged the second worst jail in the state after Rikers Island. And for many reasons. And I've known people who've been in the jail and things similar, but not quite, I think, as drastic as what you were explaining. But the building finally was condemned, and now they're farming out the detainees. And they're not prisoners, they're detainees, because it's jail, not a prison. The county legislature, I don't know, a year and a half ago, decided, well, this jail's been falling apart for a long time. They wanted to build a new jail, okay? And they're trying to build a 96-cell jail, which is going to cost, over the lifetime of the loan, et cetera, they figure about $150 million for the county. And the county of Greene County is the third poorest county in the state. But the good news is there has been kind of a revolt. A number of the legislators from both parties, a minority, but it's big enough so that they can't pass a resolution to borrow the money to build the jail. And the fight's still going on, but it's getting better. It's beginning to get into the press. It's beginning to get a groundswell of opposition. Some of it compassionate, a lot of it, why are you spending all that money on? You know, there are other things to spend money on. And also, there's a big push for ATI, alternatives to incarceration. And the DA, who happens to be a Republican, is in favor of this, and they have a committee of psychiatrists, social workers, et cetera. And to fund the whole ATI system for a year is $135,000.
Oh, my goodness.
Which, compared to 189 million, you know, and the strange thing about it, there's something that they've never had more than 40 people in this jail. And then with the new bond thing that's going through the legislature, I think it may be passed, or it's going to be passed, they figure that's going to go down to maybe 25. And then if you do ATI, probably 10. But still, there's the people pushing for this 96-cell jail. It's almost totally irrational, bizarre, etc. I think it's dying. I think that jail idea is dying, but
People
I'm
really
not
want
sure.
the jobs. The jobs is the...
Well, that's what people say, jobs. Well, what kind of jobs are those, right?
They want
All
us
right,
to
I just want
New
to
York
update
City.
you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So I've got two comments. One is about parole. Once they violate, all right, the system is set up so that you're eligible for parole before you've served your max sentence. But if they let them out on parole and then violate them on something minor, then they're going to fulfill their max sentence, which keeps the jobs going in the North Country because it's one of the only industries. So that's the cycle. But the second thing, indifference. I was doing voter reg in the jail, in the Syracuse jail, and I was helping one guy. He had a question, and he looked at me and said, "You're treating me like a human being." And I looked at him and I said, "I see a human being. They're not treated like human beings." Many of the COs, not all of them, see the people that are held in our jail as being something other than human. They see them on the level of animals. Once you see somebody as subhuman, it's really easy to do the sorts of things that Kathleen is talking about, because you're not doing it to another human being, you're doing it to an animal. And I think that's where the indifference comes from. And there's a pastor in Syracuse that says her definition of sin is when you put one type of person above another. And I would suggest there's a lot of sinning going on in our jails and prisons, and it's not.
Much better, I mean, you do stand a better chance of either having a suspended sentence or perhaps being found, you know, innocent or whatever, being acquitted. If you're in jail when you go to trial, you're much more likely, I wish I had all the numbers in front of me and I'd go,
And
I took
numbers
drugs in
are-
the 60s and I don't remember half the stuff. But,
Geo Ministry, I wanted to say about,
please,
Geo Ministry in Syracuse, pretty brilliant. They started a bail fund for low cash bails.
yeah.
So bailing out, I mean, the system won't let you bail out certain crimes, but for low cash bails, for smaller crimes or prostitution, we could get them out and keep a low cash bail. And we would lose about 10% of the bails, but we could work that out because people move and people are dysfunctional and have mental health issues. And so you're going to lose some of those bails, but those people are out of the jail. And then Jail Ministry did something really brilliant where they had, and the people, they could do the low cash bails because people who supported the Catholic worker in Jail Ministry would send $15 a month or quarterly. And so we could use that money to use for bails, and we'd get most of it back. And then there was a negative CD, Bill Cuddy called it a negative CD, where somebody would give us $1,000, and for a year we would keep that $1,000 and bail people out of the jail, and then we would get back $900 minus the 100 that you'd lose it's a negative CD. But but when you explain it to people like that too, it makes so much sense. And to get those people out.
The people that the Brooklyn Bail Fund
Yeah.
has a much higher rate of people showing up for court than other people released. I'm talking too much. One other thing on bail, like New Jersey did away with cash bail recently, last year. One of the scary things is that's a great idea. I wanted to have bail and parole, and prisons would be good too. But they did it, and some judges, it should be better, and it's not. There are many judges who instead go, okay, I can't put them on bail, I have to put them in jail. The hell with it.
No bail.
That's not the law.
There's no bail. No, it's not the law, but it's how, you know that better than I do. So it's something to be wary of when we push for, I advocate for not having bail, but even that, this system is so.
One of the things that I want to share a couple quick thoughts. One is people who haven't read Souls of Black Folk by Du Bois. 1901, he's visiting prisons in the South, talking to people about them, and the white people said, yeah, that's where the criminals go. And the black people he talked to said, no, that's where they arrest our young black people because they need labor. So part of their problem certainly has been going on 130 years, if not longer. And certainly the new Jim Crow is an important book that everyone should read. The other thing, I think, for me, just kind of listening to the conversation and being here at a Catholic Worker gathering, is the blessing and the curse of the works of mercy. Many of us here probably think we're going to get to eternal salvation because we did the works of mercy. Feed the hungry, visit the imprisoned. In the context, a little I can understand of the worker when it started in the Depression, which is a time period it's hard for me to really understand. Putting out a cup of coffee for the guys in the line waiting to get work or something made sense to do. But somehow the works of mercy have become this be-all and end-all, I think, to the worker movement, to the detriment of many things. You look at feeding the hungry. How many worker communities in the last 80 years have been involved in food co-ops? The whole CSA movement has come and gone, if you will, and worker communities haven't been too busy feeding. And I think similarly with prisons. I think there's an incredible piece of work, and I'm thinking of Barbara Smith from Albany, New York, an African-American writer, feminist, lesbian, who really talked in her 40 years now of organizing about intentionality. And what are the intentions that you set up to organize your efforts? How are you working with people of color? How many worker communities intentionally choose to work with people of color on any of these issues? Hunger, housing, prisons, and I think that Rita Corbin, I think, wrote up the Works of War, You know, the works of mercy, where are the works of justice? And I think we need that poster, and I think it can become somewhat of a guide to say, well, yes, we, you know, the top sheriff who let jail ministry exist was taking food and clothing down to the soup kitchen late at night and no one knew about it. So that's how he did the works of mercy, you know, and I think collectively we do the works of mercy and say, I'm doing the works of mercy, you know, what could be wrong with that? Well, I think in some level of integrity we say, it's not working. We can do individually our works of mercy, but collectively we've got to start working with people of color. We've got to start organizing. We've got to start looking at the issue, whether it's hunger or prisons, in a context that puts us in a different, less comfortable place. And, you know, I could go on for a lot about that. But I think, you know, as I'm hearing the conversation, I'm thinking, gee, this conversation could go on at the men's club, you know, the Knights of Columbus, the Youth Bureau of the 4 YCAs or something. But here at a worker community, we've got to struggle with our works of mercy. And what are we doing? And how do we do it? And how do we honor Dorothy and the works? But what were they like 80 years ago? And what can they be like today? You know, how do we do them and still be integrated, if you will, politically and racially with our efforts? Because I think any of these efforts need an integrated, we got to cross class lines, we got to cross race lines to deal with abolishing prisons, feeding the hungry, whatever we're going to do. You know, so I think that keep coming back to our roots of, and certainly the personalism. I think Kathleen's story, and she's incredibly modest, because the personalism is what put things in a different perspective. So as we do things politically, we can still do them personally. You know, and just struggle with what is that personal political dance? You know, that we're not going to get sucked into voting Democrat or, you know, something absurd, but we can still be true to our values and our beliefs and do the works of mercy quietly, without fanfare, and still engage in the struggles that we all know are going on, particularly certainly in relation to prisons. So.
Anybody have questions that might be helpful? Really deep questions or?
Paul said, and that's that of irrationality. We heard today several things that are really irrational from a social standpoint. And playing off of them, the drama of how wrong they are can not necessarily get us to intentionality and a measurable difference. And so one thing I didn't say when I was going to start earlier is I'm guilty.
But Tom, you can finish.
Yeah.
Just, there's people who haven't spoken,
Okay, yeah.
but go ahead and finish. I just
Yeah.
really want to ask those who haven't talked.
And by saying that I'm guilty is, I guess, saying that I'm part of the problem and I'm not innocent of what's going on with some of these people because, say, I haven't helped fix the justice system. Or however we want to say it, or because there's hungry people in the world and I'd rather buy my own coffee, you know, for $2.75 rather than get a McDonald's coffee or bring my tea to work and give $1.50 more a week to world hunger or something. So I'm guilty. And people die for that reason. I mean, they really do die from hunger and things. And so I'm guilty of other people's deaths too. But following on what Paul said, he made so much sense. A lot of these systems are not rationalized. We're supposed to be people of education, and maybe we don't take enough logic courses, but I mean, even just common sense logic of your heart, you have to come up with this is not a rational system. And then the other part is, it's not being measured. If you're satisfied with being active, and you're happy that you're active and on the good side, but you're not measuring it, then you really don't know if the work you're doing is worth $3.75 an hour,
Okay, let's,
or $20 an hour.
yes.
So, going back to the toxic prisons,
Yes.
has there been evidence of people actually getting sick from being that close to the toxic sites? And if so, has there ever been like any lawsuits or cases brought against the prison system or the
Yeah.
company about, about that?
There's so many one of the toxic things going on, yes, but there's also toxic mold in the prisons, almost all of them, big time. You know, prisoners who are unhappy, usually for very good reason, they'll start tapping at the water sprinkler heads, taking them down to create chaos. So the water's all over the jails, and there's so many with a lot of toxic mold, with prisoners and staff getting ill. When I was in Carswell, on my floor there were some solid lead cabinets, because this was a former military base, and the housing where I was a military hospital in the past. Solid lead cabinets. So there's contract workers that come in and work in the prison, and the women work with the contract workers, and they train them in plumbing and electrical and this and that, and they follow. So the contract workers and the women were drilling out these solid lead cabinets, no protection, weren't told they were solid lead, we're asking if they're solid lead, we're asking, do we need more protection than that? No, the workers died of lead poisoning, and the prison refused to support them in any way. They couldn't be sued because of somehow with the contract workers, and there were not successful lawsuits from the families of the contract workers because the prison system's so powerful and the courts are so bad in Texas. And the women who worked with them, they were sent off to all other prisons and hidden. They were suffering from severe toxic lead poisoning. There's all kinds of stuff that while I was in the prison, OSHA, they'll say they come in, but it doesn't happen. On these military bases, the women are doing the construction work for new dorms and buildings, and they'll uncover barrels of toxic waste. And then everybody's ordered away, and I got up in the middle of the night once and saw the garbage truck or some kind of container truck coming in to get in the middle of the night to get the barrel out. And I've got papers on how OSHA they snuck and called OSHA, and how hands were slapped in terms of the oversight. And with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the only oversight that there is, not even the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department has oversight over the federal prison, only Congress, which is so sick. And Congress makes the laws, makes the monies, but they are the only oversight. And that's why so many women's family will call their congressmen if they say they're not getting their medicine, they're not getting this, they're not getting that, but nothing ever gets done. It's, yes, sir.
I wasn't here for most of it. I kind of just walked in.
Yes.
I wanted to know.
What's your name?
I'm Todd. I'm sorry.
From?
St. Joe's Catholic Worker.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to know your idea on on private prisons and if you think that's still
On
a
private.
thing, and if that's still if that's popular more now than it is back then, or than it was back then.
One of the most popular things, from what little I know, I have never been in a private prison, but there's a lot of privatizing of the health care.
Yeah.
And that's really, really bad. It's all bad with or without, but the privatizing of the health care, there's so much death and unnecessary death, and we're all faking it when we go to jail, and especially the women, we're all faking it. And I remember Shanice, and I remember another woman, topic pregnancies, yelling and screaming all night long in pain, unimaginable pain, the kind of pain that nobody puts up with. You have to go to the hospital, and then collapsing and dying and bleeding out. And the nurse had been in the room with them, telling them they're faking it and not providing care. And so, whether it's a lump, if you get a lump in your breast and you're a woman, you're told it's a pulled muscle. But so, I know around the privatization, they're always trying to privatize the medical care. And with or without privatization, it's worse. I don't know, Bear, what would you say, worse or?
The privatization of medical care in jails is done by counties and states in order to insulate the municipal entities from lawsuit. Because if it's caused by a private company, then you're not suing the state, you gotta sue the company. And then the liability for the municipal entity is reduced. But the reality is there's like 5 or 6 companies that do medical care in prison. None of them are good. All of them are problematic. Some of them are deadly.
There was a recent man, I'd just done some, and it was through Black Lives Matter, so I'm glad you're wearing the shirt. I think in Alabama recently, where he got poisoned because they still have down there, they still have workers that make plates and whatnot, and a lot of them weren't wearing protective gear and things of that nature. But the man complained basically of just racial discrimination on the fact that he was dealing with a white CO, and that he had asked that white CO politely, he was like, hey, can I go to the hospital wing? I'm not feeling so good. And they denied him basically on 3, maybe 4 different accounts. There was even an account that he made fainted in their prison library, and they waited to see if he was, like you said, many people were faking it, but he wasn't, and he did die. So that was, I can understand.
I was with a woman in Carswell prison in Texas, in the dining room, and she fell and had a heart attack in her late 50s. Someone I knew, and I started CPR. There was another woman with me, and the officers ordered me away from her and stopped CPR, which I had to do, and ordered away from her. And they called the medics, which took more than 10 minutes to get there, and they just allowed her to die. I mean, they really...
They did the same thing with Raul. They locked him in a room, he wasn't breathing,
Yes.
they locked him in, and then they waited 7 minutes before they send somebody in. How long does it take you to die if you're not breathing?
when I-
A couple seconds at most.
So it's
depending on
not
how
just-
bad you are.
3 to 4 minutes.
there's more and more. So I'm looking at, Germany again, and all the good people who couldn't do anything, who were too afraid. And so I was seeing the face, I really hate making those comparisons, but it was the same kind of setup, because there's really good people, and the number of people dying in the prison system, and it really has to affect those guards on a big level, because a lot of them were back from Iraq, and were trying to get back into society and do something better with their lives. And I would talk with them, and they were decent people, but it was way over their heads. It was way over, and I really felt the compassion for all of them too. Not the one who ordered me away from the prisoner not to do CPR. I mean, it's diabolical.
And that seems the same that person wouldn't take over the process of what you started until help arrived, knowing that he would know that help would come within a 10 to 15 minute radius. He's like, look, I can't just sit here. Let me continue what you're doing, at least until we find some more medical attention that has higher knowledge on what to do about the situation. And that's
It's gone
barbaric,
beyond what we should be doing now, or was.
Yeah.
So, and I also want to say to people, because I used to, as a Catholic worker, I used to go to jail and I'd say, oh, I'm going on retreat this week. Because life is so hard at the Catholic worker. We used to kind of joke about that until I really saw what I saw. And I mean, when I saw, oh, these are people just like me, but then it wasn't funny anymore.
Yeah.
But, and so, but we'd go to jail and we'd have our stories and we'd see some bad things. Now it's different. I'm very worried about Kings Bay and those folks, Liz, a former co-defendant, Claire, and all of them, and because we can die in prison now. And the intervention is very little. It's very hard. 6 years after I got out of Carswell, I got a call from a friend who's an attorney, and there was a woman in Carswell dying, and we had to try to get her out. And I was outside the the base. I was on the base. The base knew I was a plowshare activist and let me onto the property. And I was outside the gates of Carswell for 10 days trying to get Diane released. And I had to go back more than once. So I was able to get, through friends, I was able to get the judge who sentenced her and the prosecutor, got to him. The judge ordered her to be released from prison. The prosecutor said, I want her out. This was never intended. The prison refused, the federal prison refused to allow Diane out. Even when they were ordered out, there was nobody who had the power, but we persisted and persisted. But I don't know how much longer even that's going to work. I mean, if you can imagine, so even trying to advocate, like Lynn Stewart in New York City, what she went through and how long it took, and these, they're dying too, so even with strong advocacy, I'm very worried about people going to prison now, and at least that they know the reality. Now, Claire Grady got out, the most recently from Kings Bay to bound out, wearing a monitor. She thought she had a blood clot in her leg. She was very frightened. So she's out, but goes out, gets on the bus tomorrow to go back for motions in Kings Bay, Georgia. But she had to get this checked out. It's something we all need to carry with us and know in our hearts, to at least have that knowledge and know that like anything can happen. It's just so you know. Okay. So any more questions? I hope this is helping.
We haven't talked about solitary confinement, and there's an strong effort in New York State now to end that.
Successful effort. In some
Well, it's been reduced.
It's getting better. So were you ever subjected to solitary confinement?
No, I was also awful tempted to be in solitary, but I would work to stay in population. It's so easy to say no and screw you, But I wanted to stay in population with the women, and I would really try hard not to end up in solitary. But Steve Kelly has been in solitary, one of the Kings Bay, over and over. He does it all his time, and he's very monastic-like, but not for these young men and young girls and all, and how it destroys them, and people who are already with severe mental health issues. And if you don't, like in our box in Syracuse, they torment you in solitary. They take everything from you. You don't get a pencil. You have to ask for everything, and if you're lucky, you might get something. And I think the thing that drives most people the craziest in jail and prison is you're arrested for something you did wrong if you did it, So, okay, you go to jail, but you have rights in jail. And when you see the people who are guarding you in prison violating all the rules, it makes you crazy in your head when they don't give you what you know is rightfully yours in jail. It really messes with your head. But they don't have the capacity I wouldn't have the capacity to feel any better with some of this solitary confinement, with the lights 24/7, the lights are on, the noise, the clanging, the banging, and the tricks that they play. So it's a very important thing to be fighting.
After 10 days, there are mental health.
Speak up.
Sorry. After 10 days, there are possible mental health consequences of punitive isolation. After 10 days. And I know in our jail, there's people that are sentenced to 6, 8, 9, 10 months in punitive isolation.
What
And some
jail
of them were
was
16-year-olds.
Onondaga County, Syracuse.
Yeah.
16-year-olds even.
Yeah,
and
not anymore, but only because of a class action lawsuit.
it took a long time,
Yes, it
and
did.
a lot of work. So it's a very important issue.
But adults are still subjected to that.
Well,
Not
adults, what is an adult? Legally an adult? As soon as you hit 18 in Onondaga County, you could be put in 5B in the box for months. And if you have an inside infraction, what they do is they charge you with everything they can, and then every little block of days that they punish you with is added up. So that's where the 6 months come, by loading up the internal charges intentionally to control you.
So, just,
in the US.
Go ahead.
just having a question. So, you were explaining that, eventually after so much time in the box, it does wear on you mentally and physically and emotionally. So, of course, because women prisons are much different than male prisons. Do you think that the rate of a woman going through the process of maybe having a little more physical frustration going on, say it could be, and it's not to just, just say it could be a certain time of the month and things are not working right and they put you in the box and you're just extra pissed off, things. Do you think that the guards sometimes, depending on who's guarding you at that point, do you think maybe that they might have some sort of identity saying, I do understand what the person's going through, let me try to make it easier, or are they stuck to this code of, I'm sorry, this is what I'm doing, this is my job, I have to do this?
The worst thing is to have a mental health issue in the jail. You're tormented on top of it. You're mocked. You're stripped naked. Suicide watch is, you don't go and get a nice place with flowered wallpaper or anything. I mean, you're stripped naked, or you might have this fabric thing that doesn't rip that you can't use to hang yourself. But the one-on-one watch, the deputies get overtime, and oftentimes they mock you and torment you, and they make sexual innuendos. And women issues in jails and prisons are the sex, the poor food. Oh gosh, I could go. What I've experienced too in the prisons is the women are doing more time than the men, but most of you probably know that because of the drug charges. So I was in the prison one day and a 78-year-old woman came into my dorm, 78, Savannah Means from Birmingham, Alabama. See, because we don't know, we don't see the face of the prisoner, but she's in my dorm. She was arrested because she wouldn't cooperate with the government. Her grandchildren were doing drugs. They had her phone taped. One day, now she wasn't involved with the drugs, but one day her grandson called her in the hood and said he was going to come to visit her. She said, no, don't visit today. She said, the police are outside. Don't come today, come another day. Now what black grandmother doesn't tell their kids or grandkids not to come?
Right, yeah.
So she was arrested. There were 16 grandmothers in the prison I was in, and they got 8 to 12 for that. 8 to 12 years for refusing to cooperate. She was in the prison. 8 to 12 years. 8 to 12.
The men can deal, they have information. The women can't deal, they don't have information, they get longer sentences.
So when a woman's caught up in an arrest, now her partner might have participated in drugs, and she might know about it, and she's home with the kids, and she might benefit in terms of maybe more food on the table, maybe, But they come in the Fed system when the state charges go federal. They come in waves, and they take the first wave, the most involved, and then they'll come for more and more. So the men have the information to make a deal and give up names. The women typically don't. So the women are typically doing more time than the men are in prison.
I've seen a lot of those with women. Sometimes they'll even with children, they'll even use that as a weird bargaining chip. Like, if you don't tell us we're going to put your kids into the system, and that makes it even worse because I don't know anything. And then when you say you don't know anything, they use that as a playing card, saying yes you do. So we're going to shake this in front of you, until you give us what you want. Yeah. And many of my friends have gone through the foster system sometimes on some of those small accounts because of things that, their mother's completely guilty of, and not guilty of, and it's so messed up. So.
If I could interrupt.
Are we at the closing?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have, of course, gone by our hour to 8:30, and, if you would sure like to, talk to Kathleen after this, please, feel free to stay if you're willing to
Oh,
stay.
sure. I just hope it was helpful and useful.
I
Because
think
I'm
it's
so
been
glad you're
beautiful.
doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. We got our socializing now. Down